Good evening, everyone. We begin a new study today in the book of First Samuel. And because the book of Samuel, First Samuel is actually relatively long, about 31 chapters, we are going to concentrate on the first 16 for now, and that will cover us for the next couple of weeks. And as usual, when we start off a book like this, we would do an introduction. And so allow me to actually build an introduction so that we are all level set as to what First Samuel is all about. Now, it's important for us to realize that the book of First Samuel, although it is a prophet book, and it is listed as a prophet book also in the Hebrew Bible. The nature of First Samuel is quite different from the other prophet books that we have covered. For example, in Hosea, in Malachi, in the other prophet books like Jeremiah, Isaiah, and so on. And those are what we call prophets from the split kingdom. They are all filled with warnings. They are all filled with rebukes, complaints of God. Uh, and more importantly, that we know that what God is particularly uh, paying attention on the nation of Northern Kingdom, Israel, the Southern Kingdom, Judah, it's on two very fundamental issues. One is on idolatry, and the second one is in the area of social injustice called Hamas, which includes violence and oppression of the poor, the needy, the widows, the orphans. And God has so much to say and warning them of the impending doom had they not repented. Now, when we come to the beginning of the entire history of Israel, and it all begins in the book of Exodus, and then it goes through the rest of the Torah into uh, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and with the Torah completed, it goes into the handoff to the next prophet in the form of Joshua. And Joshua was the man that came after Moses, and the people recognize him as one with the uh, same relationship with God, like Moses, and they followed Joshua for a number of years. Now, let us take a good look at how from Joshua it goes into the book of Judges, and then only into the book of First Samuel, where we are today. So let me just give you a brief outline of where we all came from Exodus. Now, it is important for us to have I would say, a bird's eye view of the times of the judges that ends with where we are studying the book of First Samuel, and it introduces us to the prophet Samuel, and he, as we can see, would be the last of the judges in that sense. Now, why do we call these judges? One of the things that we may not be aware is that the term judges is a term that is given to a leadership role throughout the times before the kings. Meaning, in the book of First Samuel, you would see the appointing of the first king of Israel. Now, before the kings, there were no kings. God was their king, and God appointed judges, people who would deal with the issues of the society and determine the penalty and the rules and execution of whatever that needs to be done according to the Torah of God. And here in this slide, I've tried to express this, that it all begins with Moses as they came out of Egypt. And they spent 40 years with Moses. And from Moses, it was handed off to Joshua. And that is recorded in the book of Joshua. Now, in the book of Deuteronomy, predicts, God gave a prediction that there will come another prophet like Moses, with the same kind of relationship with God, so that the people will know who to follow, and that would be Joshua. Now, from Joshua onwards, we would have the book of Judges. Now, the book of Judges span, I think, would be all this period, right? All this period. And this would be the book of Judges. And from the book of Judges, we have a number of judges that came along, some longer, some shorter. So we have Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Avimelech, Tola, Yair. Now, after Yair came a time of occupation, I would say, by the Ammonites. And this, I will reflect it with a different color, the Ammonites. And then we come back to the judges again, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Avdon, and then, of course, the more famous Samson here. And right after Samson would be Eli or Eli. Now, Eli does a handoff to Samuel, and the period of Samuel isn't very long, but very important, right? Now, remember, all these are years of the office of the judges rather than their lifespan. And this will tell us a bird's eye view of where things are before the kings came about. Another equally important element would be our understanding of the Ark of the Covenant and where the tabernacle was over this period of time. The time of First Samuel was particularly tumultuous, meaning the ark was captured at the time of Samuel, right? And so we begin by recognizing that when the ark and the tabernacle was set up, it was always in the wilderness. And after the setup of the tabernacle, they remained in the wilderness for almost 40 years. And then when Joshua brought them out of the eastern shore of the Jordan, and then came from the Jordan, they went to Gilgal, and that was where they set up the tabernacle, and was where the Ark of the Lord was hosted for a number of years. The longest period of time is in Shiloh. This is a place where we can actually visit today. This is a time where in Joshua chapter 18, where they set up the tent of meeting, as well as the Ark of the Covenant in Shiloh for 369 years. Now, thereafter, which would be here, right here, we have big problems because all these events happened. And that's what we are going to cover in the book of First Samuel, where we read how the Ark of God was captured, moved around all over the place. And eventually they ended up in Kiriath Yearim, and that would be, they would be there for 20 years. The ark would be there after the final movement. And then eventually David brought it to the city of David. However, what we may not be aware of is that the tabernacle didn't move like the ark because it wasn't captured. The, the tabernacle was set up in north for 13 years, and then later on in Gibeon, that would be for about 50 years. Even Solomon offered sacrifices at the tabernacle because that is where the altar would be. And then later on, when Solomon built the temple, then the tabernacle was discontinued and the ark was moved into the temple right behind the curtain in the Holy of Holies. Now, this whole picture is an introduction for us to be well aware of what's happening to the times of First Samuel. Now, we will cover the first 16 chapters in the early days of where the ark was captured to where it is located, to the time of the appointing of Saul, and then to the time of God's rejection of Saul, into the period where God appointed a man after his own heart. And that would be where we will end for our study. We begin our study today in 1 Samuel chapter 1, starting from verse 1, and it talks about this. Now, there was a certain man. When we talk about a certain man, we are not talking about a specific man until the name was given to us. So, 1 Samuel really begins a new chapter of events. Not directly connected to the end of the book of Judges, because there would be a number of years that would have been left off from the time of Samuel, and also looking at the time of Eli, that would be at this period of time as well. Now, Eli came into the scene that we know here in 1 Samuel chapter 1. And so let's get on with the story first. There was a certain man from Ramathaim. Zophim. Ramathaim Zophim is, how should we say, Ramathaim is actually a place of worship, right? A place of worship. We could say this. This is a place of worship. It is also known as a high place. Now, high places are always located on high locations, right? And that's why it is described as a hill of the country of Ephraim. Now, it says the country of Ephraim. How should we say? This would be a lookout place somewhere in the hills of Ephraim. I would call it a lookout, a country, but a lookout means a little enclave on the heights, on the hills of Ephraim. And hence, this high place is actually in the hills of Ephraim. Now remember, we need to disengage our minds from understanding Ephraim as the place of the northern kingdom. There is no north and south kingdom at this point in time. But the name Ephraim definitely comes out because Ephraim is the hills just north of Jerusalem. And this is the plot of land that was given to the tribe of Ephraim, the lead tribe of the northern kingdom that is eventual. And his name was ElCana. Now, ElCana is the son of Yeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, and he was an Ephraimite. Now, an Ephraimite has two meanings, really. We see two meanings. One is a person who comes from Ephraim. The second uh, uh, is termed as a very wealthy person, right? Very wealthy person. We would have read something like this in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, when we were there. And so he is from Ephraim, definitely, and he's also an Ephraimite, a wealthy person. So the story revolves around a person by name of ElCana. ElCana, how would you say it? You can say that he is the that God is possessive, right? God is possessive. The word Cana is jealous, zealous, that God wants to keep together. And so ElCana means God has taken possession or has obtained. No, that's some of the translation that's possible. So that would be the main person that we are going to talk about. In verse 2, we begin by noticing the family of ElCana. Now, ElCana has two women. Two women. It's very important for us to note that the actual word here is women. Now, again, allow me to digress a little bit by explaining. In the old days, women are equivalent to wives today. And correspondingly, men is equivalent to husbands. However, the same word, man and woman, needs to be determined by context. And so in this case, it says he has or he had two women. And by context, it would mean that he, in his, I would say in his home, he possesses two women. And the names of the women, and so the names are important. When names are talked about, names will give us the idea of the character. Names will also give us the, I would say, the a memorial. Now, this word memorial basically is to remind of specific events. Now, we may not be familiar with the use of names in the Hebrew context. And every time you see the word name, no, we don't really pay much attention to. But whenever the Hebrew text raises this word name, it is to tell us that the text is going to narrate things concerning the character, right? The character of this person. And not only that, it is also to remind us of what actually happened to her, and meaning the events that surround it. And so the importance of the word name is therefore crucial for us to pay attention to the study. So the first one is Cana. The second one is Penina. And it describes I guess you would say the character of that life, that Penina had children, but Hannah had no children. at this point in time. So let's break this down a little bit before we move on. The word Cana, Cana would mean grace. It would mean favor. And that would be a very interesting name, because at this point of the narrative, the woman that is named Grace or Favor, Hannah, appears not to have Hannah because she had no children. And the other one was named Penina. Penina means, well, I guess you could say a jewel, perhaps a precious stone, right? Something precious, a precious stone. And Penina is also somewhat of an importance because she was depicted as one that had children. Now we're going to spend some time as we go along to touch base on some of the ancient practices, which, if you are familiar with ancient Chinese practices, in particular, you would be able to identify with much of how the Hebrew people lived. Now, Penina had children and thereby became very important in the family of ElCana. Cana, on the other hand, depicting grace and favor, at this point in time, as the story begins, had no children. And in an Oriental family, when a woman does not have children, the woman will feel that she is inadequate. She is incomplete. Because as a wife, as a woman who belongs to a man, she would be expected to have children to carry forward the name. Now, we see this in the Oriental family of China, even of India as well. However, in the Hebrew culture, it is even stronger. Now, if we recall, many of the important women in the history or in the book of Genesis, for example, it begins with Sarai, Abraham's wife, and she was not able to have children, and yet God made it possible for her to conceive. Then we came to Rivka, the next one, the wife of Isaac, Yitzhak. She also could not conceive. And it's a terrible thing when you cannot give birth. And she appealed to God and she managed to give birth to a set of twins. The third one, the wives of Jacob, Yaakov, you have Leah, and then you have Rachel, and Rachel couldn't give birth as well. And God eventually showed favor to her, and she gave birth to two sons, Joseph and then Benjamin, and she died after childbirth. Much of the time, whenever the Bible text talks about no children, is to depict the state of mind of Hannah. And she would really feel really bad. She would feel that she is an incomplete woman. She would not feel that she has any grace or any chen for that matter. And in verse 2 depicts two women, one very happy. Penina has children. Hannah has none. And so we have a happy wife and a sad wife, both belonging to the same man, ElCana. That's what we can glean from 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 2. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 3, we are now going back to the narrative of ElCana. It's talking about this man. This man is ElCana. And so ElCana would go up from his city in Ephraim, in the hills of Ephraim, we saw in verse 1, every year to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Now, Shiloh would be somewhere in between the hills of Ephraim, uh, at the foothills of Ephraim, uh, on the way to Jerusalem. Now, of course, at this point in time, there is no Jerusalem in the picture, but just understand that it is somewhere in the middle between the hills of Ephraim and Jerusalem. Now, at the foothills of Ephraim, we would find another place, uh, and that place is Shechem. And Shechem would have two hills, Mount Eval and Mount Gerizim. And, Shiloh would be somewhat further south of it. Now, you take a look at verse 3. It says that he would leave his city, and it says yearly. Now, this word yearly it may be better translated as for every event of the year, or for every day of the days. I think that would be easier to understand. It's Yamim, Yamim, Yamima, and is to city in the days of days. This would tell us that there would be the feast days. And on all the feast days, he will go down, and it says to worship, which would be to bow down. Allow me to digress. The word worship, again, we have talked about this many times, is an English word which is not quite equivalent to the Hebrew text. The Hebrew text really means to bow down all the way to the ground. And yes, when it is done to God, it fits the English word worship. When it is done to men or kings or powerful men as a sign of obeisance, that is the same word, worship. So basically, worship is the bowing down, and most of the time prostrate on the ground. Now, we don't see this very much. However, maybe perhaps in some ancient movies, you would see how the ancient people would bow down to the king all the way to the ground, sometimes lying flat. And they do that in respect to the person that they are meeting. And so God would be Elohim, and God would be the mighty one that they are bowing down to. And that is how the concept of bowing down is invoked in the Oriental mind. The second thing is sacrifice. It's about the slaughtering. It is to slaughter to God. Now, this one is the Lord of hosts, Jehovah Tzebaoth, in Shiloh. Now we're introduced to another gentleman by the name of Eli, meaning ascension, to rise up. And that's the name of Eli. This is not the Psalm Eli, Eli, but this is uh, from the word Allah, meaning to rise up, to go up. He has two sons. His two sons is Hophni and Phinehas. Phinehas, they are priests to the Lord, which tells us that uh, Eli is also a priest, right? Eli is also a priest. And then we would develop the picture of Eli a little later on. Now, not only that Eli is a priest, let me just highlight this. He is from the tribe of Levi, and he must be from Aaron because of the priest. So he is also a priest. If the sons were priests, he would be priest as well. He is also a judge. And as I indicated, he is an unknown judge, even at this point in time, until a bit later on. So just take my word for it right now. He is everything here as a Levite, as a son, a descendant of Aaron. He is a priest because his sons are also priests, and he is also the judge at the place. Very important person who is akin to the, I would say, the national leader of the place, right? Of the entire nation, so to speak. Let us do two more verses and then we will call it a day today. Now it switches back to ElCana. The reason why it switches back and forth is a very interesting way of introducing certain people. So ElCana was the first person that was introduced in First Samuel. And then the two wives were introduced with certain elements of character. And we are told that ElCana is a very godly man, very pious man who will go to Shiloh to sacrifice. And that would be giving peace offerings to God. That would be to observe the feast days. And in Shiloh would be where the tabernacle is, where the Ark of the Covenant is. And more importantly, then we are then introduced to Eli, right? Eli had two sons and they were priests. And so Eli was a very important person as an introduction to him being a judge. In verse 4, when the day came that ElCana sacrificed, and we don't know what particular event is this, we're not told. And it might be that he would it would be a festival, a holy day, and he would give portions to Peninnah and to all her sons and her daughters. And this would be when you say a portion, um, a portion would be a part that was from the sacrifice, right? Apart from the sacrifice, and is eaten by the family of ElCana. And in so doing, I think we can also see that ElCana is also from the Levites. And so let me just briefly point out First Chronicles chapter 7. First Chronicles chapter 7 is First Chronicles chapter 6. And we would find that ElCana is described in verse 23. And he was from the tribe of Levi, from the son of Levi called Kohath and Korah. Remember Korah, who went against the likes of what we call Aaron, right? And ElCana is part of the tribe of Levi, and so they were also part and parcel of this particular story to tell us that he comes from a very important tribe, and the Levi are the ones who are to serve God in the tabernacle. Now, one of the things that we need to follow is that we are not told about the rest of the children of ElCana yet, but later we will see. In this case, in verse 14, there was portions cut out for them. And when it came to Isaiah, 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 5, to Cana, he would give a double portion. Now, what does that mean? This really means how should we say? The word double here comes from the word nostrils, right? It comes from the word nostrils. And there are two nostrils. And so it says that there is one nostril portion, which is translated, and I believe it is correctly translated. But this word double portion is our English version. We could also say that this is the best portion or the choice portion. So instead of saying two portions, ElCana would give the best of the portions to Cana. That would be a better way of explaining it. Because he loved Cana, but the Lord had closed her womb. Now, this essentially is important. This is to show that there is a sense of favoritism, right? There is a sense of favoritism, but it is more of a preference. So ElCana, having two wives, Penina and Cana, and there is sons and daughters, and Hannah has none. And we read this very similarly in the lives of Jacob, right? In the case of Jacob, we have Leah, and then we have Rachel or Rachel. It's the same picture all over again. And Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. And so now we see ElCana loved Hannah. Now notice when he says he loved Hannah, it doesn't mean that he doesn't love Penina, but he loved Hannah more than Penina. And in so doing, this picture here, a double portion or a choice portion to Hannah, shows the love for Hannah. So we have an A and then we have a B. And by demonstrating that Hannah actually got the better portion than Penina, illustrates the love of ElCana to Hannah. Now understand, in the old days, love in the Hebrew sense is not about the affection, right? It's not just the affection. The Hebrew expressions doesn't use that word for pure affection. And so the word ahav is to demonstrate the act of giving and providing and protecting another. And by saying that ElCana loved Hannah, means ElCana has a preference of giving things to Hannah and that would be the choice portion. And it doesn't mean that ElCana didn't give anything to Peninnah. He gave a not the choice portion to Peninnah. So understand this, that it is not that ElCana did not love Peninnah, but it shows us that ElCana loved Hannah more in a more special way than Peninnah. And then we are told another piece of information, and this is the sad piece of the information. This word close means to shut, to close up her womb, and it talks about an inability to have children. And we've seen this in major female personalities, as in Sarai, in Rebecca, in Rachel, and now in Hannah, which also tells us that as a pattern, opening the womb is also God. So we see here the Lord had closed. Now, understand it this way. Did God purposely close her womb? We're not told, right? We're not really told. But in the ancient times, when we don't understand something, like a person not able to give birth, it is ascribed to God. Now, it is not about blaming God, but it is ascribed to God, because anything that seems impossible in the mind of the individual would be said to be done by God. And so when Hannah was not able to have children, it is said that God has shut up her womb. So it is what we would say a way, an expression, right? An expression. Now, we also saw that in the case of Sarai, Rivka or Rebecca, Rachel, and now in Hannah, it is also God who would open the womb. And so the opening and closing of the womb is not a human thing, but a divine, God ascribed role. That is something which is usually said about the ancients, right? Usually said about the ancients. Now, one of the last point I want to make before we end is this. Hannah would also be a very sad woman, as I indicated, because she would feel that she is incomplete. And she would look across to Peninnah, and she had sons and daughters, right? Plural, not just one or two. It's more than that. And she has none, which makes her feel extremely small. That would be also how Sarah would feel when Hagar had Ishmael. Now, even though she would be the woman of the house, not able to give birth, really breaks the woman down to a point where she feels that she is incomplete, and she is, well, in the terms of Hebrew culture, more or less dead. You know, when the womb is dead, it means that you're not able to give life. Conception and birth is the act of giving life. And so Chava, or the English word Eve, is the mother of all living, because the woman is the one who gives life. And that's how it's seen in the Hebrew culture. And Eve being the mother of all women to give life. And so Hannah feels that she is dead because she is unable to give life. Now, that's how the woman in ancient times will feel. And so in Oriental culture, this is quite prevalent as well. So by the time we end in verse 5, we have seen a couple of things. One, ElCana is the primary focus, and with him, two wives, Peninnah and Hannah, and with that, Hannah will be the focus. When he comes to sacrifice in Shiloh, Eli would be the focus, and so would the two sons who are priests as well. And so we would see more of Eli and Hannah in the verses to come. And as an introduction, we have now gotten an understanding that it will revolve around ElCana and Hannah, and whatever happens would be something that we would study together. With this, we come to the end of our introduction to the book of First Samuel. We've covered verses 1 to 5.